Most people think remembering is about repetition. Read something enough times and it sticks. Write it down over and over. Flashcards, drills, cramming the night before an exam. And sometimes it works just long enough to pass the test. Then it's gone. But here's the peculiar thing about memory. The harder you try to force something into your head through repetition alone, the more fragile that memory becomes. It's like building a house on sand. It looks solid for a moment, then the first wave washes it away. The mind doesn't work like a filing cabinet where you stuff information into drawers. It's more like a living organism that grows and changes based on how you interact with it. And once you understand this, once you see how memory actually forms, you can make your brain remember almost anything, not through brute force, but through a completely different approach. Let's talk about what really happens when you try to remember something. You sit down with a textbook. You read a chapter about, say, thermodynamics, or biology, or history. Doesn't matter what. You read carefully. You even underline the important parts. You feel like you understand it. At the end, you close the book and think, got it. 3 days later, someone asks you to explain what you read. And suddenly, it's all fuzzy. You remember there was something about entropy, or cells, or some historical event, but the details are gone. You can't explain it clearly. You might remember the words, but not what they actually mean. This happens because of a fundamental mistake people make. They confuse recognition with memory. They confuse familiarity with understanding. When you read something, your brain recognizes the words, follows the sentences, and creates a feeling of comprehension. But recognition is passive. You're letting the author do the thinking for you. The logic is right there on the page, pre-digested. Your brain nods along. Yes, this makes sense. But it's not building anything. It's just watching. Memory real, lasting memory requires something else entirely. It requires reconstruction. Think about the difference between watching someone build a table and building one yourself. When you watch, you see the finished product. You understand that wood gets cut and joined together. But if someone hands you the lumber and tools the next day, could you build that table? Probably not. You'd realize you didn't actually learn how the joints fit, which cuts to make first, how to ensure it's level. Learning works exactly the same way. You can watch ideas get assembled on a page, but unless you've assembled them yourself in your own mind, with your own hands, so to speak, you don't really have them. This is where most education gets it backwards. People read and reread, they attend lectures and take notes, they highlight passages, all passive activities. Then they wonder why nothing sticks. The solution sounds almost too simple. Close the book and try to explain it to yourself. Not in your head where you can cheat and skip over the fuzzy parts, but out loud or on paper where every gap in your understanding becomes immediately obvious. Let's say you just read about how natural selection works. Close the book. Now explain it. Start from the beginning. What is it? Why does it happen? What are the actual mechanisms? How does variation arise? What does fitness really mean? Walk through an example. When you try this, something remarkable happens. Within seconds, you hit a wall. You thought you understood, but now you can't quite articulate it. You stumble over certain concepts. You realize you don't know what you thought you knew. This moment, this frustrating, uncomfortable moment, is where memory actually begins. Because now your brain has to work. It has to reach into what you read and pull out the pieces. It has to arrange them. And when you can't remember something, when there's a gap, you have to go back and find it. You look it up again. But this time, you're not just reading passively. You're hunting for a specific piece of information you need. You're filling a hole you discovered yourself. This active struggle creates strong memory. Your brain builds connections. It doesn't just store words. It stores the process of figuring something out. And that process is what makes memory durable. Here's another crucial piece. You have to simplify everything until you could explain it to a child. Not because children are stupid, they're not, but because children haven't learned to accept vague explanations. If you tell an adult something complicated using fancy terminology, they might nod along even if they don't fully understand. They don't want to look foolish, but a child will stop you and ask, "But what does that actually mean?" That question is gold. It forces clarity. So when you're trying to explain something to yourself, imagine you're explaining it to someone with no background in the subject. You can't hide behind jargon. You can't wave your hands and say it's complicated. You have to find simple words. You have to use analogies. You have to make it clear. This forces you to understand at a deeper level, because you can't simplify something you don't truly understand. You can memorize complex terminology, sure. You can repeat sophisticated sounding phrases, but stripping away the complicated language and explaining the core idea in plain terms, that requires real comprehension. Take something like entropy. Many students memorize that it's a measure of disorder and leave it at that. But what does that actually mean? What is disorder? Why does it increase? Can you explain it without using the word entropy? Try it. You might say, in any closed system, things tend to spread out and become more mixed up over time. Like if you drop a drop of ink in water, it doesn't stay in one spot. It spreads out until the whole glass is slightly colored. That spreading out happens because there are more ways for the ink molecules to be scattered throughout the water than there are for them to stay clustered together. And natural processes favor the arrangements that have more possible ways to happen. That's understanding. That's the kind of explanation that sticks in your memory because you built it yourself using ideas you can actually picture. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The brain has a peculiar feature. It forgets the scaffolding but keeps the building. When you first learn something, you need lots of support, detailed explanations, examples, intermediate steps. But once you truly understand it, all that scaffolding falls away, and what remains is the core structure, clean and simple. This is why understanding creates such powerful memory. You're not trying to remember 1,000 individual facts. You're remembering a few key principles. And from those principles, you can reconstruct everything else. Imagine learning mathematics. You could memorize every formula as a separate fact. Quadratic formula, area of circle, volume of sphere, Pythagorean theorem, each one stored independently. That's a lot to remember, and if you forget one, it's gone. Or you could understand where these formulas come from. You could see how the quadratic formula is just completing the square. How the area of a circle relates to unwinding it into triangular slices. How the Pythagorean theorem follows from comparing areas. Now, you're not remembering dozens of separate formulas. You're remembering a few fundamental ideas, and you can derive the formulas whenever you need them. This is the difference between brittle memory and flexible memory. Brittle memory shatters when you forget one piece. Flexible memory bends and reconstructs. But there's another element that makes memory permanent: spacing. The brain strengthens connections based on timing. If you learn something once and never think about it again, the connections weaken, the memory fades. This isn't a flaw, it's efficient. Why waste energy maintaining information you never use? But if you come back to an idea, especially just as you're about to forget it, something powerful happens. The brain says, "Oh, this must be important," and strengthens those connections more than before. This is why cramming fails so spectacularly. You might stuff everything into your head in one marathon session, pass the test, then watch it all evaporate within days. The brain sees it as one continuous episode, not important enough to maintain long term. The solution is to spread out your practice. Learn something today, come back to it tomorrow, explain it to yourself again, then wait 3 days, explain it again, then a week, then a month. Each time you successfully reconstruct the information, the memory becomes stronger and more durable. And here's the key. Each review should be active. Don't just reread. Close the book and reconstruct. Test yourself. Explain out loud. This feels harder than passive review. It is harder, but that difficulty is precisely what makes it effective. Easy review doesn't challenge the brain. Active reconstruction forces the brain to work, and that work builds lasting memory. There's also a strange phenomenon that happens when you really understand something. You start to see it everywhere. Once you grasp how leverage works in physics, you notice it in seesaws, in can openers, in the way doors swing. Once you understand natural selection, you see it in medicine, in software design, in cultural evolution. The idea becomes a lens through which you view the world. This isn't just interesting, It's another mechanism of memory. Each time you recognize a concept in a new context, you're strengthening those neural pathways. You're creating more connections, more retrieval routes. The idea becomes integrated into how you think rather than isolated in some mental filing cabinet labeled "Things I Learned for School." Let's bring this down to earth with a practical scenario. Suppose you need to learn about the nervous system. You have a textbook chapter to get through. Here's what most people do. They read the chapter, maybe twice. They highlight key terms. They make flashcards with neuron, synapse, action potential. They drill these terms before the exam. Here's what works better. Read a small section, maybe just about how neurons fire. Then close the book. On a blank piece of paper, draw a neuron from memory. Label the parts. Explain in writing what happens when it fires. Why does the signal go one direction? What role does the myelin sheath play? You'll get stuck. You'll realize you're fuzzy on several points. Good. Open the book and find exactly what you need. Read that specific part carefully. Close the book again. Try the explanation once more. Now you've actively wrestled with the material. You've identified your weak spots. You've filled them in. The information isn't just sitting in your memory, it's woven into your understanding. Next day, before reading the next section, reconstruct yesterday's material. Draw the neuron again. Explain the firing process again. This time, it should be easier, but you'll still find gaps. Fill them in, then move forward. Do you see what's happening? You're not plowing through the textbook in one sitting. You're building knowledge piece by piece, making sure each piece is solid before adding the next. It's slower initially, much slower, but at the end, you actually remember everything. You don't need to cram, you already know it. And here's the remarkable part. Weeks or months later, if someone asks you about the nervous system, you can still explain it. Not because you memorized it, but because you understood it. You built it in your mind so thoroughly that it's part of how you think now. This approach applies to anything. History? Don't just read about a war or revolution. Close the book and explain the causes, the key events, the consequences. What would have happened differently if one factor had changed? Languages? Don't just memorize vocabulary. Use words and sentences. Explain grammar rules in your own words. Make up stories. The pattern is always the same. Active reconstruction, simplification, spacing, application. Now, there's something worth understanding about why this works. Something fundamental about how the brain operates. The brain is not designed to store information the way a computer does, with each file neatly separated. Instead, it stores information as patterns of connection between neurons. When you remember something, you're not pulling up a file, you're recreating the pattern. This means memory is inherently reconstructive. Every time you remember, you're rebuilding. And this is why active practice works. It rehearses the rebuilding process itself. You're not just storing information, you're practicing retrieval. This also explains why understanding beats memorization. Understanding means you've connected new information to existing knowledge. You've built multiple pathways to access it. If one path fails, you can come at it from another angle. But isolated facts, memorized without context, have only one fragile path. If you forget, you have no way to reconstruct. Think about phone numbers. Years ago, people could remember dozens of phone numbers. How? Because they used them frequently. Each use strengthened the memory, but also, they often chunked them, breaking the 10-digit string into smaller, memorable pieces. And they might create little stories or patterns to help. Now, imagine trying to remember a random string of 50 digits by just staring at it. Nearly impossible. But if those digits encoded a pattern you understood, maybe they represented measurements or a sequence from a mathematical formula, suddenly it becomes manageable. Understanding provides structure, and structure makes memory possible. This is why experts in any field seem to have extraordinary memories in their domain. A chess master can glance at a board and remember the position of every piece. A musician can hear a complex piece once and play it back. A physicist can recall vast amounts of theory without checking references. It's not that they have better memory. They have better organization. They see patterns where novices see chaos. They chunk information into meaningful units. They understand the underlying structure, so they're not remembering individual facts, they're remembering the framework, and the facts follow naturally. You can develop this kind of memory in any field that matters to you. It just requires that you build genuine understanding, not surface-level familiarity. Here's perhaps the most important principle of all. You must be willing to feel stupid. When you close the book and try to explain something, and you realize you can't, there's a moment of discomfort. You feel foolish. You thought you understood, but clearly you don't. This feeling makes people want to skip the testing, to avoid the embarrassment even if no one's watching. But this feeling is the signal that learning is happening. This is where your brain is identifying gaps. This is where real understanding begins. If you always feel comfortable, if everything always seems clear, you're probably not learning. You're probably just recognizing familiar words. The students who succeed are the ones who embrace this discomfort. They seek out the edges of their understanding. They ask themselves hard questions. They don't settle for vague comprehension. There's a beautiful thing that happens once you make this a habit. Learning becomes its own reward, not because it's easy, but because you can feel yourself getting sharper. You can feel your understanding deepening. Knowledge stops being this external thing you're supposed to cram into your head and becomes something you build, something you own. And once you know how to learn effectively, everything becomes accessible. Any book, any field, any skill, you have the tools to master it. Not instantly, not without effort, but genuinely and permanently. So here's what matters. The next time you need to remember something, don't just read it over and over. Don't highlight and hope. Close the book and build it yourself. Explain it in simple words. Find the gaps and fill them. Come back to it later and rebuild. Make it yours. The mind remembers what it constructs far better than what it merely observes. Give your brain something to build, and it will remember. If this approach to learning resonates with you, try it with something you're studying right now. Close this video and test yourself on the key ideas you just heard. Can you explain them? Share your experience in the comments.